Now, so far we have discussed that what kind of impact of income change can be there on the consumer's demand function, right? And we have seen it through different examples of the preference mapping. Now we are shifting our focus to the impact of price change on the consumer demand. So now our key factor is going to delta P instead of delta M. So now let's begin. So the impact of price change on consumer demand, it's broadly, it can be understood with the key definition of the goods which we classify under the following heads. To begin with, first of all, uh, it's the ordinary good. Now, what are ordinary goods? Now, again, we are considering an XY plane. Okay, XY plane with commodity X and Y. Two commodities are being consumed. Say, for example, the budget line is M equals P1X plus P2X, P2Y. Here I am considering XY plane. It's similar to X1, Y1. You can write it anyway. So for ordinary goods, what are they? So when the consumer desires a less of good X, when the price of X increases. So for a good X, you can call this good as ordinary. This is going to be an ordinary good when the price of X, which we can write as P of X and P of Y. So when the consumer desires less of X, when the price of X, when X becomes expensive, you demand less of X, it's called ordinary good. And how to represent it mathematically is that change in demand of X with respect to change in price of X is going to be negative, which means that demand for X falls because your price of X has gone up. So that is an ordinary good. Now for the Giffen goods, what the case is that when the consumer wants to consume more of good X, even after the price is going up, even after having price rise delta Px, basically this is increasing, okay, and still you are consuming more of X. So this is going to be positive, which is the case for Giffen goods. Such goods are termed as Giffen goods. Now note that Giffen behavior is specifically for the inferior goods, which occupy a major part of consumers' budget, and in absence of substitutes, they keep buying such commodities which are inferior because they don't have any substitute. So that's why a consumer will resort to consuming such inferior goods, and demand rises as income rises, but it is because of the income effect. This should be noted. Now what about the substitutes? Now in case of substitutes, what happens is that when a consumer desires more of X, demand for X is going up as compared to Y, but when the price of the other good is going up. So the demand for a commodity is going up when the price of other commodity is changing. So this is what a substitute is. So for example, let's consider the case of beverages. It can be hot beverages or cold beverages. Okay, so let's consider the case of a latte and an iced tea. Okay, say for example, or cold coffee. I mean, it sounds more like a substitute. So let's consider the case of a latte and a cold coffee. So what happens is that, say for example, the price of latte changes, okay, and a simple cold coffee may be costing little less, okay, and cold coffee is X and latte is Y. Price of latte went up, okay, and as a consequence you resorted to consuming more of cold coffee. So this is an example of example of substitutes. Likewise, in the fuel market also we can think of, like because petrol vehicle you cannot directly substitute with the diesel vehicle, essentially because it has a huge reservation cost involved, huge cost involved, to switch for such product. So we cannot call it a substitute, but yes, on those lines you can think of substitute, that price of one of the commodity is going up, and as a result of that the demand for other commodity is changing. So this is what essentially is reflected in case of substitute. So change in demand of X due to change in price of Y. Okay, if it's going to be there, then it's substitute. What about the complements? Now in case of complements, what happens is that the consumer is going to desire less of good X, okay, when the price of the other good rises. So a good which the consumer desires or wishes to buy, okay, has preference for a particular good X. Now the demand for that good is going to go down because the price of the other good has gone up. Okay, so how to represent this is change in demand for X, okay, with respect to change in price of Y, and this is going to be negative. So when the price of the other good increased, okay, consumer resorted to buying less of good X as well. So this is about the complements. Now let us see graphically each case one by one. So for ordinary goods, like we have discussed, that the consumer demand is going to increase as the price is going to change or the price is going to increase. So in this figure we can see that, say for example, the budget line was at AB and there was a price change and the budget line pivots outward. So it rotated to a B prime point. Now the new optimal bundle has shifted from point P to point Q. Okay, now we shifted from point P to point Q, and as a consequence you can observe that the X1 consumption is somewhere here, and for X2 it's here. This is X2 prime, this is X1 prime, the new consumption bundle, and the initial case it was somewhere here. Now observe the amount. Okay, this is X2 naught and this is X1 naught. See the relative change here, right? Both the commodities, I mean relatively there is a more increase in the consumption of X1, but overall if you observe, what is happening is that your demand is going to, I mean, go down, right, as the price of X has increased. I am sorry, yeah, basically this figure is for the price decrease. So demand has increased, right? As the price decrease, your demand, yeah, it's correct, yeah. So the price fell down, okay, price fell down for X1, which implies that the demand for X1 increased. This is essentially being highlighted, right? Don't get confused. So what is happening? From AB, our budget line rotates towards AB prime because X became cheaper, X1 became cheaper. As a consequence, it makes sense that a consumer buys more of a cheaper commodity, right? So at point Q, if you observe and compare it with point P, your change in X1 is relatively more as compared to X2. So X1 here, it's a normal good, right? I mean normal and ordinary good basically, because we are understanding right now in terms of price. So the consumer desires less of X when the price of X rises, but here the example, the figure is showing that consumer desires more of X1 when price of X1 falls, right? So don't get confused with this. I mean this figure is basically highlighting this. All right, now let's move on to the next example. So what about the Giffen goods? Now we know that the consumer wants more of a good even if its price is going up, right? Because there are no more no more other alternatives available, right? And primarily because this good tends to be an inferior good, that's why. So we know that it's given as that the demand for commodity X1 is going to go up if the price for X1 is going to increase. Even after that it's going to be consumed more, right? So how to represent it graphically is, say for example, consumer is initially on a budget line like AB, okay, and what happens here is that the moment your budget line, the price increases for x1, okay, the budget line shifts to a b prime, and the new optimal bundle is somewhere here at point q. From p we move to point q. Now at point q, if you observe the commodity bundles, now see, initially we were having this combination of x1 and x2, right, somewhere here. So this is x1 naught, this is x2 naught, and now when there is a price change, what happened, we are at this kind of point where you have x2 prime and this is x1 prime. So your demand for good 1, it has gone down, okay, but for the x2 it has gone up. Now in this case, what is an inferior, or what is a Giffen good here? So the Giffen good in this case is x2, right? So this sign, if we are to interpret, I had mentioned x1 here, but graphically if you understand this, because of the price decreased, right, the price fell down, and the consumer preference is in a way that he consumes or shifts to an optimal bundle at point q, where the x2 good is being consumed more, even if there is a fall in the price. Ideally it should have been x1, right? In the previous example we observed, if x1 is cheaper, why would a consumer be willing to consume more of x2, right? So this is the case of a Giffen good, how it can be represented graphically. This is essentially telling that ideally it should have been that it would have been somewhere here maybe, right, if it were a normal good. But now here we can observe that it's not x1 whose demand is increasing because of the fall in price, it's the other good. Even if it's getting expensive, it's relatively expensive, it's being demanded more. Now what are price offer curves and demand curve? Now in the previous cases we have been discussing the income offer curve and the angel curve. Now for a situation where the price change is being studied, okay, so we have the notion of price offer curve and the demand curve. So just remember these terms, that income offer curve and angel curves, they relate to change in income, and price offer curve or the demand curve, they relate to price changes. Now in these two figures here, what is being highlighted is, say for example a consumer has a consumption bundle, the budget line AB, and there is a price change over the period to A prime, B prime, and then to AC prime, okay. So these changes took place over the, or AB double prime, okay, let's consider it's AB double prime. So these changes took place and corresponding optimal bundles were P, Q and R. Now the locus of the combination of these points, because of the change in price, in case of income offer curve, these shifts were taking place because of the change in income, which were parallel in nature. But now because of the change in price, our consumption optimal bundles have changed from P to Q, Q to R, corresponding to price changes. So that's why these are termed as price offer curve, okay. So this is about the price offer curve. Now what about the demand curve? Like we were discussing about the angel curve, it was a relationship between the income and the commodity, which we were considering that how the demand for a commodity changes as the income changes. Now because right now we are studying the price change effect on the demand, so how the change in price reflects on the demand for a commodity, it can be x1 or x2. So say for example for x1, if you observe from this graph at point P, when we were there initially, when the price changed, okay, it shifted to AB prime, right, there was a rotation in the budget line. So we move to point Q, where we can observe that the consumption of x1 has gone up and relatively more as compared to consumption of x2, okay. And corresponding to that, as the price keeps decreasing for x1, the demand keeps on increasing, right? the demand keeps on going up. So likewise, what we can observe here, when the price was, say for example, $10 or 10 rupees, the demand corresponding to this was, say for example, somewhere here, okay, 5 units. When the price went up to 30, okay, the demand fell down and the demand came down to, say for example, 2.3, okay, and vice versa, because this case was for the fall in price, because x1 is getting cheaper, that's why the rotation is taking place in this direction. So when the price falls, say for example from 30 to it came to $20, okay, when the price fell, what happened? When the things became cheaper, the demand increased, right? Compare it with a point, this point, and here, right? Let's say this is from L to M. So L to M is basically implying that your price of commodity X1 fell, which implies that your demand for X1, it went up. You can observe the corresponding value which you will be getting at 20, price 20 as compared to price 30, it will be more. So this is about the price offer curve. So the locus of combination of these points which you are getting corresponding to different level of prices for a commodity demanded is giving us essentially the demand curve, right? Because demand, what is demand? It's represented as a function of price, right? So this is what we are getting. Now let us look again at some examples like we saw in the case of income offer curves and the angel curves. So first of all, the perfect substitutes. Now let us assume that the demand for good one, it is 0, and the price for demand for good one is 0 when the price for commodity 1 is greater than that of the other commodity, that is commodity 2. Why? Because you can recall from the previous case of income change as well, when your P2 is going to be cheaper, what happens is that a consumer will never go on to afford a commodity, okay, which is a perfect substitute and expensive, right? It makes sense to a consumer that to go about a commodity which is cheaper when a perfect substitute is available for a price change, right? So likewise, what happens, or any amount of budget line when P1 equals to P2. So this is essentially the slope, and when P1 less than P2, so what happens in case of perfect substitutes is that we get the price offer curve coinciding with the horizontal axis. So this is essentially our price offer curve, which is on the axis where our x2 is totally 0, right? And corresponding to this, our demand curve looks like as follows. You can see this is coinciding up till the point where the price equals to that of the other commodity, right? And after M upon P1, again you can see that there is an inverse relationship between as the price goes up, okay, as the price is going up, your demand is going down. So say for example it was $50 here, now here it's $30. So corresponding to $30, your demand is somewhere here, and initially at $50 it was somewhere here. So demand has gone up as the price fell down, right? So this is the case for perfect substitutes, how you can visualize. Now in case of perfect complements, we can recall the example of shoes, okay. What happens is that whatever be the prices, the consumer is going to demand the same amount of good 1 and 2. I mean, for example, if this is a left shoe and this is a right shoe, so obviously he or she is going to demand a pair of shoe, right? So they are going to be there in demand in proportionate amounts. So this thing is clear. So we know that whatever be the price, the demand will be of same amount for both x1 and x2, I mean x1 and x2, okay. And the offer curve which is resulting from this is going to be a diagonal line as depicted in this figure. Now you can observe this diagonal line, basically this is essentially tracking the price of a curve. Initially, say for example, the consumer had a budget line AB, right, and the price line shifts now because the price for X1, say for example, the X1 became cheaper. Even if it became cheaper, it went to be prime, still you need a proportionate amount of both, right? So the consumption again is going to be proportionate. So what happens as a consequence of that, because we know from our chapter 5 discussion that the demand for a perfect complement, say for example for x1, it's given as x1 equals m upon p1 plus p2, and this can be easily derived from the functions which have been already discussed, and even the derivation has been done in the chapter 5. You can refer to the video for detailed insights, but yeah, the point is that for perfect complement, what happens as a result of price change is that still the demand for the products for the good 1 and 2 is going to remain same. So this is what essentially is being captured here. And in the demand curve, so if we are fixing the slope, say for example this m remains constant, okay, and p2 is also going to be fixed, okay, price of 2 is also fixed, and we are allowing only price of x1 to change, right? That's why this shift took, I mean rotation took place. So the relationship between x1 and p1 can be plotted here, from which we are getting the demand corresponding to the change in price, and which is essentially telling us that as the price goes down, the demand keeps going up. As the price goes down, the demand keeps going up. So this is increase in demand for x1, right? So this is about the perfect complements. Now let's talk about the case of the discrete goods. We know that discrete goods are the ones which are always consumed in integral values. It will be either 1, 2, so on up to n, right? It can't be fractional amounts. So what happens here is that as the price of good 1 falls, we are assuming that the price of good 1 is going to fall, price of good 1, that is P1. So as the price of good 1 is falling, so there will be a reservation price at which the consumer is indifferent between consuming good 1 or not consuming it at all, like because it's either 1 unit of this good, for example, being consumed, otherwise there is no other unit of good being consumed, right? It's going to be in integral numbers. So when the price is going to fall further, so more units of good will be demanded. It's quite intuitive to think of that, right? So likewise, what we get in terms of the optimal bundles is these points, right? And similarly, if we have to track the change in the demand with respect to change in price, I mean to obtain the demand curve, we know that at price R1, for example, reservation price R1, corresponding to it, there will be a particular unit of good, because this is a discrete good. It's never going to be 0.1, 2, 3. It's going to be in integral values. So at reservation price 1, at this particular price, 1 unit can be consumed. If the price falls to this point, no point in between, to this point, we know that corresponding to this point, the demand is going to be this much. No point in between this. These points are not going to be there. Only 2 units, right? So this is how the plot is going to be for the demand curve. So this is about the discrete goods. Now